Legs shaking, heart a quaking, nerves are trembling. Never fear, my dear, the Schofield on Shakespeare Last Minute Revision Guide to the IGCSE English Language Examination is here. This video will be divided into three very clear sections. Firstly, I, or rather some of my pupils, will give an overview of the examination as a whole. Then I will introduce an actual adapted past paper with both reading passages and appropriate questions. I will give some points and suggestions as to how you might approach each question before asking you to press pause and have a go at physically writing an examination style response in full. The final section of the video will talk through suggested responses and refer in detail to the mark scheme and give you an opportunity to evaluate your own work. The hope is that this in-depth discussion of a real past paper and its mark scheme will develop your understanding of what you need to do in the examination to get that top grade. Let's have a listen then to how pupils in my class summarised the exam.
English IGCSE. These two words have brought more pain, fear and dread to students than any other subject in the history of humanity. Look at those chemists strolling by. Pfft, they have it easy. All they need to do is learn their ions and they're fine. Look at those linguists under that tree. Vocab, grammar, sorted. But English is a different beast. Look here, the young budding author, having published his first novel, age 3, reaching international fame. The Times states that his sales overtook Shakespeare last June. What could go wrong? But alas, this boy got a U.
You see, the English examination has a reputation, actually an unfounded reputation, of being highly unpredictable. This is why it terrifies people so much. However, it doesn't have to anymore. Do not fear any longer, young Englishmen. I will guide you through the exam, with all the different sections, and how to do well in them. By the end of this, you could get an A star with your eyes closed.
The IGCSE English exam has 3 questions.
The first question is a response to a passage, generally in the form of a 200 to 300 word response. It will be one of letter, report, journal, speech, interview, newspaper report, or magazine article. You will need to transform the passage into a different format using your own words. So, for example, you might be presented with a magazine article that you need to transform into a letter. Alternatively, you might get a newspaper report that you need to transform into an interview.
This section is marked out of 20. 15 marks are for content and 5 are for writing. To do well, make sure you read the passage through at least twice before starting, and highlighting is very helpful. So get down to Wells and whip out those highlighter pens. They'll be worth every penny. I repeat, every penny.
In question 1, there are 3 bullet points which will need to be incorporated equally within your answer. Make sure that you answer all of them fully, with a great deal of supporting detail from the text. Finally, to get the writing marks, make sure to use the writing conventions of the type of response, letter, interview, etc., and try to keep an appropriate writing style to the character you are creating while still using impressive language. Once you are done, check through for grammar and careless errors. It would be criminal to throw away marks on stupid mistakes.
The second question refers to specific paragraphs from the first passage as well, so make sure to reread them carefully. You will be asked to select and describe 4 powerful words or phrases, each from 2 different paragraphs.
write a small paragraph for each word, about 25 to 30 words. Try to be as precise and as concise as possible. For each, mention what kind of word it is, adverb, noun, etc., what it directly means in context, and any underlying meanings that show why the author used them. It is good to connect some answers to other parts of the text to show wider understanding. There are 10 marks available, and to get all of them, try to vary the chosen words so they are not all similar.
The third question is in two parts and refers to a new text.
The first part is to find 15 bits from the text that answer a specific question or summarize an aspect of the text. Answers should be written in note form and direct copying can be used. First, read through the passage carefully and then read through again while highlighting potential answers. Check that each answer is directly relevant to the question and avoid repeating the same point. There are 15 marks available, 1 for each answer.
The second part is a focused summary of the passage using the notes from the first part. You have to use your own words and continuous writing. It is marked out of 5. To avoid losing marks, stay within the word limit. Don't waste words on an introduction or a conclusion, and don't add any new points. While changing your notes to your own words, be careful not to lose the initial meaning. Finally, try to be as concise and clear as possible.
To prepare for the exam, do some practice papers. Specifically, practice identifying key points for the summary question and check with the mark scheme to make sure you found all of the points. Make sure you know all of the conventions for the different types of response in section 1. For section 2, do practice questions, then go over your own answers and make them both more concise and more precise.
That's it. A star. Easy. Now reread this story time and summarise it for practice. 15 bullet points relating to cheese, please.
I will finish by quoting Douglas Adams. Don't panic.
Thank you. Let's now move on to details, and in particular, an adapted past paper. This one is based on the June 2010 examination. I say based on because questions 2 and 3 have changed slightly since then. Arguably, they've got easier, certainly for the markers. Remember, the majority of the marks in the exam are awarded for the understanding you reveal through your writing of the 2 reading passages. Therefore, it is so important to read the passages carefully before starting writing. I would recommend reading it through once before looking at the questions. I would then read it for a second time using a highlighter pen and annotating the text with some thoughts relevant to the questions. The advantage of this is that it helps you process your reading more efficiently and also means that the very first words you write in the examination will not be marked and therefore need not be your very best. Have a read through passage A, narrated by some pupils within my school. In this passage, the writer recounts his visit with his friend Larry to a gorilla sanctuary in the Republic of Congo, which is run by Yvette Leroy.
A young man sprawled in a wicker chair. A small chimpanzee wearing a nappy clung to his chest. "Hi," he said, somnolent with motherhood. "Yvette is expecting you." "I'm Mark and this is Max. He's a young pygmy chimp." Max, hearing his name, detached a long black right arm from the hugging position, and with the delicate fingers of a dark brown hand, tousled Mark's hair.
"This is the first pygmy chimp I've ever seen," said Mark, easing Max's thumb out of his ear. "They're very rare. They live only in Zaire, south of the river." He was brought in by the Forest Service. Someone was trying to sell him as a pet in the market. It's the babies we get, almost always gorillas. The hunter in the forest kills the mother and takes the baby back to his village for the children to play with. Very occasionally, one is rescued and is sent to us, but it's hopeless. They arrive with machete wounds, dehydrated with dysentery, their stomachs full of earth they've scraped up in the village because they're starving, parasites of all kinds. And gorillas are sensitive, full of emotion. They've watched their mothers die in front of them, they're traumatized, and if they don't die of disease, they die of grief. They just lose the will to live. They refuse to eat. 27 gorillas have arrived in the last 2 years and only 4 are still alive.
And pygmy chimps? Asked Larry. Do they die of grief? Not yet, said Mark, putting one arm around Max and stroking his back with the other. I'm treating him for parasites, but otherwise he's in good shape. He seems much more intelligent even than a common chimpanzee. An ordinary chimp of his age, much more sociable. Very little's known about pygmy chimps. Are you a zoologist? Asked Larry. No, but I'd like to be. I'm here to set up a new gorilla orphanage for a friend in the grounds of Brazzaville Zoo. We'll have a proper vet, everything. We'll establish a breeding colony, and then release them somewhere safe.
Mark stood up. We must find a vet. This is the one day of the week when she has enough staff to let Magna out of his cage. He's her 3.5-year-old gorilla. He's lively. He paused, extracting Max's right foot from his shirt pocket. See, pygmy chimps have a web between their second and third toes. They weigh 20% less than common chimps. Their hair is blacker, their faces are rounder, their ears are smaller, and they don't go bald. Mark opened a steel-grilled door, and we entered a room full of couches and cushions. Children's toys were strewn across the floor. A Bantu girl in a red dress lay on a bed in a corner, watching a television on the shelf opposite her. A very small, very still gorilla snuggled against her stomach. This is Albertine Dokila, said Mark, introducing us. She looks after one very sad, sick gorilla, 18 months old.
The inner door swung open, and Madame Yvette Leroy swung into the room with 2 baby gorillas hanging from her. Quick, she said. Bring some chairs. The guards are about to release Magne in the garden. He's lively. Sit quietly, stay in your chairs, and whatever you do, don't look into his eyes. Gorillas never stare at each other. It's a threat. There was the sound of a bolt being drawn back, the clang of a cage door. A sharp, barking scream, a rumbling noise on the concrete, and round the corner came Magne on all fours, in a hunched, scooting gallop. Big and grey, Magne slapped Yvette on the back, detached the 2 screaming baby gorillas, roughed them up a bit, banged his chest, tore at the grass, and with a sideways glance moved towards the newcomers, us. He's jealous, said Yvette, still out of breath from her blow on the back. He's jealous of my new babies.
At that moment, Magna's knuckles arrived on my thighs, followed by his big black man-like feet, as his hands moved up to grip my shoulders. Good boy, I said, made stupid by the weight, the solidity of him, the rank musk of his bristly chest hair. I put both hands up and pushed with all my strength against the surge of muscle. Without effort he pressed closer, brought his shiny black face close up to mine and opened his mouth. I was conscious of 2 upper canines, as big as marlin spikes, a pink cavern and tongue, grinders, spit, a smell as sweet as cow's breath, and then he bit my ears, carefully, first one side and then the other, growling manically the while, a growl which varied in pitch and tempo, as though he were engaged in a very fast, aggrieved conversation with himself. Satisfied that he had improved my manners and taught me not to stare, Magna paused and looked about his kingdom.
So, you've read the passage for the first time and have a broad understanding of what it is about. Time to focus on the question. You already know that it will ask you to transform the text into a different text type, that it will give you 3 bullet points which you should explore approximately equally, and that it will be worth a total of 20 marks.
It's so important to read the question properly. I'd strongly recommend highlighting a few key words from the question to ensure that you sharply focus on what you need to do. Within this exam, there's no room or time for unfocused waffle. It's time pressured, and everything you write needs to show a sharp understanding of what you have read. If I was taking this exam, I would highlight these particular words from the question. Larry. So I'm not writing as the narrator, but as his friend Larry. I scan read the passage to see where my name is mentioned. Ah, here, I ask about pygmy chimps and whether Mark is a zoologist. The original text is some kind of travel account, but it would need to be rewritten not just by someone else, but in letter form. The word letter triggers off a few thoughts. Who is the letter to? My family. That means the style can be reasonably informal and the content personal. As with all letters, the first sentence should reveal the reasons for writing, and in this case I'm writing to give a thoroughly entertaining account of a memorable visit to this gorilla sanctuary and to persuade them to support it. In particular, I will enjoy writing about the moment Magna, the huge gorilla, grabs hold of my friend within the first bullet point. I need to make the chimps and gorillas sound interesting and lovable. My initial reaction is that sounds fairly straightforward. I can dimly recall visions of chimps snuggled up to humans. One wearing a nappy. And of course, it's reasonably interesting when Magna comes out of his cage. I would need to incorporate these details in my own words within the letter, and others too that I spot from a careful second reading. The second bullet point asks me to specifically talk about Mark and Madame Yvette. So I scan the passage and see that Mark plays a huge role with some long speeches, whilst Yvette comes in towards the end. I will need to look at what they say and how they are described very carefully in my second reading. In the third bullet point, I would need to persuade a member of my family, let's just say my dad, to support the work of the sanctuary. How will I do this? I can dimly recall the passage referring emotively to the suffering of gorillas and horrendous wounds caused by ruthless hunters. Perhaps I can play on this. I also need to think about what form the support could take. A donation to the sanctuary perhaps? Raising awareness of the animals' plight back home?
Now I fully understand what is required from question 1. I need to reread the text, annotating it for details relevant to all 3 bullet points that I can rewrite and incorporate within my letter to my dad. The passage will now appear once more on screen, but without the narrative. Each slide will move on to the next after 5 seconds. So therefore, press pause on each one, read it through carefully in your head. This second reading, I think, is vital to ensure that your response is sufficiently detailed.
It's now time to start writing a response. Here's one that I've started.
Dear Dad, I'm sorry I haven't been in touch for a while. It's much harder to get access to the internet in the countryside here in Congo, and so I've decided to resort to old-fashioned means. Yesterday I visited a gorilla sanctuary, which was quite an eye-opener. The first chimp I saw had a nappy on, and seemed more like a passive, docile baby than a wild animal. Indeed, the visit reminded me of the similarities between humans and chimpanzees. The latter are clever, gregarious creatures, just like us.
Remember, the key is to ensure that every single sentence in your letter shows a thorough understanding of one aspect of the passage, as well as the text type you have been asked to produce. And so, the first sentence shows an understanding of letter writing conventions. The tone is appropriately informal, as I'm writing to my dad, as shown in the use of contractions and phrases such as for a while. Meanwhile, in my second paragraph, beginning yesterday I visited a gorilla sanctuary, I rewrite and react to the first paragraph from the passage. The relationship between the chimpanzee, Max, and Mark seems far more father and son than sanctuary professional and wild animal. My use of the words clever and gregarious paraphrase Mark's positive comments about pygmy chimps in the middle of the passage. This develops my point about there being a much closer than expected relationship between humans and animals, thus helping ensure the latter come across as both interesting and lovable within my letter. Now have a go at writing your own letter. Aim to write 250 to 350 words and to show a thorough understanding of the 3 bullet points using clear, accurate written English. Unless you are using a laptop in the examination, I would recommend doing this by hand on paper. Press pause now and go back a little in this video to locate the passages so that you can refer to them. Spend around 40 minutes writing your letter.
How did you get on? I hope that you are now staring at 2 sides or so of carefully written letter, raving about the chimps and gorillas, musing about the different qualities of Mark and Yvette, before persuading your father to support the sanctuary, giving reasons why. So let's now look at the mark scheme and give you an opportunity to gauge how much you would have scored if you had written this in a real exam. The mark scheme gives some suggested responses for each bullet point and points out that good candidates will answer all 3 well. Fudging one of the bullet points and writing more for another in desperate compensation inevitably will lose you marks.
Press pause and read this. How many of the points do you mention? Now, unlike in question 3A, I don't think you need to mention all of them. These are defined as possible content as opposed to compulsory. The key is to draw on numerous references from the passage and transform them into lively, engaging sentences within your letter. Let's move on to the second bullet point about Mark and Yvette. Press pause and read this. Now let's move on to suggestions about the final bullet points. Press pause and read.
The examiner will then need to make an overall judgment about your response, and they would do this by referring to 2 grids, one giving up to 15 marks for reading understanding and one for up to 5 for the quality of writing.
So this is the grid for reading. To get band 1 or an A or an A star, your response needs to indicate a thorough reading of the passage, integrating a wide range of ideas. All 3 bullet points are well covered. Essentially, the writing grid looks at the quality of your writing. Does your letter sound like a letter? Have you sequenced your ideas clearly using accurate sentence structures and paragraphs? Is it interesting to read? Now give yourself a mark out of 20. If need be, press pause while you do this. It's now time to move on to question 2. Here it is. The key point to note is that you will write about a total of 8 words or phrases, 4 for question A and 4 for question B. Let's reread the first relevant paragraph.
There was the sound of a bolt being drawn back, the clang of a cage door, a short, sharp, barking scream, a rumbling noise on the concrete, and round the corner came Magni on all 4s, in a hunched, scooting gallop. Big and grey, Magni slapped Yvette on the back, detached the 2 screaming baby gorillas, roughed them up a bit, banged his chest, tore at the grass, and with a sideways glance moved towards the newcomers, us.
We now need to choose 4 words or phrases from this paragraph and explain how each one is used effectively. I'm going to choose 2, talk about them briefly, before giving you an opportunity to write your response. Hunched scooting gallop. How is this effective? Well, the adjective hunch reiterates the fact that Magni is a gorilla, and so when he moves, his back and shoulders would be in a rounded shape. Meanwhile, both scooting and gallop suggest speed and... Given that Madame Leroy has already warned her guests ominously about Magni being lively, this emphasises the possible danger the guests may be in. The speed suggests a degree of frustration, possibly, following his confinement within the cage. clang of a cage door. This is a loud, abrupt sound, and the use of onomatopoeia helps the reader vividly hear the cage door banging open, implying that the gorilla has vigorously thumped it. I hope that's given you a few ideas. Now spend around 10 minutes writing your own response to this question. Press pause. Let's now move on to the next paragraph. In this paragraph, we need to focus on the writer's impressions of Magna. Let's reread the paragraph.
Good boy, I said, made stupid by the weight, the solidity of him, the rank musk of his bristly chest hair. I put both hands up and pushed with all my strength against the surge of muscle. Without effort he pressed closer, brought his shiny black face close up to mine and opened his mouth. I was conscious of two upper canines, as big as marlin spikes, a pink cavern in tongue, grinders, spit, a smell as sweet as cow's breath, and then he bit my ears, carefully, first one side and then the other, growling manically the while, a growl which varied in pitch and tempo, as though he were engaged in a very fast, aggrieved conversation with himself.
As before, I'm going to choose 2 words or phrases, talk about them briefly, before giving you an opportunity to write your response in the second part of question 2. As big as marlin spikes. This simile refers to the gorilla's teeth and emphasises just how sharp they are. A marlin spike is a pointed iron tool used to separate strands of rope or wire, and this imagery suggests the teeth can potentially cause enormous damage and cut through thick objects, and also, presumably, cause significant harm, therefore, to human beings. The surge of muscle. In this section, the narrator is trying to push the gorilla away from him, and the phrase surge of muscle emphasises just how difficult this is by drawing attention to the gorilla's physical bulk and strength. The noun surge suggests a powerful, sudden energy, making him seem all the more potentially dangerous to a mere human being. Now spend around 10 minutes writing your own response to this question. Press pause.
So, how did you get on? You should now be staring at 8 clumps of intelligent analysis, 4 about the language used to describe Magna's approach and behaviour, and 4 about the language used to describe Magna. So let's now look at some suggested ideas within the mark scheme.
Press pause and read this.
Let's shift to some suggested ideas for question 2b, the writer's impressions of Magna.
Press pause and read this. As with question 1, the examiner will then need to make an overall judgment about your response, and they would do this by referring to a grid. A Band 1A A-star response will have a wide-ranging discussion of language, tackle imagery with some precision and imagination. I particularly like that word precision. There's no room for waffle or vague platitudes about has good effect on the reader, etc. Give yourself a mark out of 10. If necessary, press pause. It's now time to move on to passage B and the third question.
Borneo is the world's 3rd largest island and home to one of the oldest, most precious tropical rainforests. The World Wildlife Fund is taking action now to protect a large area, the heart of Borneo, from being destroyed. We need your help to make this happen. Over the past 10 years, more than 360 new species of plant and animals have been identified, and we know that there are many more still waiting to be discovered. Unless we step in, these species could be lost forever. Deforestation is sweeping across this incredible island and threatening its jewel, the heart of Borneo. Commercial logging, much of it illegal, and the clearance for agriculture and palm oil plantations cause most of the damage. Fires, deliberately started
to prepare land for the plantations are also a serious and recurrent hazard.
Why is it so important to protect the heart of Borneo? Thousands of the species are unique to the island, making their extinction a real possibility. The forests are also home to a rich diversity of plant species that could provide future treatments and cures for diseases. Lastly, the region is home to 500,000 people, plus a dwindling population of the man of the forest, otherwise known as the orangutan. The only great apes found outside Africa, orangutans, once roamed freely around the islands of Borneo and Sumatra. They spend most of their time in the treetops, feeding and sleeping. If the trees are removed, the orangutans lose both their home and their food source. Female orangutans usually give birth to one baby before taking care of it for up to 6 years. Orangutans have the slowest reproductive cycle of all great apes, an average of 80 years between births. Sadly, their slow reproduction cannot keep the population from declining because of the impact of deforestation and poaching.
Palm oil production is very profitable. It is a main ingredient in all kinds of everyday products, such as ice cream. The climate and landscape of Borneo make the island a magnet for plantation developers. But to get to the soil, they have to clear the trees. Being exotic hardwoods, the trees themselves are also valuable. In 2001, the World Bank predicted that all unprotected Sumatran rainforest would disappear by 2005. This happened. In 2005, the World Wildlife Fund predicted an uncertain future for the remaining rainforest in Borneo. Without protection, by 2020, the rainforest could become too fragmented to ensure the long-term survival of the orangutans. Scientists believe that up to half of the orangutan population has been lost over the past 10 years. If their annual death rate increases by just 2%, orangutans face extinction in the next 30 years.
Despite legal protection, there's a thriving underground market for orangutans as pets. Up to 3 a day are taken for this reason alone. Orangutans are also killed for their meat. By building roads into the rainforest, the illegal loggers make it easier for poachers to hunt and kill 1,000 orangutans each year. In nearly every case, the poacher has to kill the mother to capture the baby. This means that for every baby kept as a pet, at least one adult is lost. Clearly, the first problem to tackle is deforestation. If we halt the logging and tree clearing, it will not only protect the habitat, but help save the orangutan.
So you've read the passage and once again have a broad understanding of what it is about. Time to focus on the question. You already know that the first part of question 3 will leave you space to jot down 15 bullet points about an aspect of the text, and that you will not have to use your own words. You also know that it will be worth 15 marks.
So this question is asking for phrases detailing dangers that exist for orangutans to be copied down. From my first reading, I recall that deforestation was mentioned as threatening orangutans, and the fact that they are taken for pets.
Now I fully understand what is required for question 3a, I need to reread the text, annotating it for details about the dangers that exist for orangutans. The passage will appear once more on screen, but without the narrative. Each slide will move on to the next after 5 seconds, so therefore press pause on each one. Read it through carefully in your head. This second reading, as I've said before, is vital to ensure that your response is sufficiently detailed.
Now have a go at completing this question. In the real exam, there will be 15 bullet points to find. Because this is adapted from a past paper with a very slightly different format, this particular question has only 11 bullet points to find. Spend 20 minutes or so writing 11 bullet point notes. Press pause.
Let's see now how your answers correspond to those within the mark scheme. Unfortunately, this is marked reasonably prescriptively, whereas in questions 1 and 2, the examiner can exercise a little more judgment. Here, it is a simple check and tick. If you have the pointers specified within the mark scheme, you get 1 mark. If not, you don't.
Mark your own work now and press pause. In the final question, of course, you just need to incorporate all bullet points within a summary response to the question using your own words. Note that in this particular case you will only be able to include 11 points within your response, but in the exam there will be 15. The key here is expressing yourself concisely, as there's a great deal of points to cram in. Have a go now. Press pause. Here's the mark scheme for this final question. You need to use your judgment. But I would argue that if you have written clearly and fluently and included all points, you should get the full 5 marks.
So we've come to the end of this revision video on the CIE IGCSE English Language Exam. Tot up all of your marks. How did you get on? Ended up with a band 1 overall perhaps? But actually, arguably, what is more important, from watching this video, looking at some suggested answers, studying the mark scheme, what could you have done to have got an even higher score? This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, exploring the CIE IGCSE English Language Examination. Many thanks for watching.